Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about the importance of having and maintaining an internal compliance program, particularly for companies subject to export controls. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Institute of Export and International Trade's Export Control Profession. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Senior Content Editor at the Institute, and I will be your host for the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. And it's great to see so many of you on today's call. A warm welcome to everyone. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. Here you will see we have a great panel of 3 speakers today, all from the Institute. Shortly, we'll be hearing from Roger Arfi, the Chair of the Export Control Profession. Leading today's presentation, we have Richard Coker, a trader and customs consultant at the Institute's Academy, who, as you can see on the slide, has vast experience in the export control space. And it's my delight today to welcome a webinar regular in Kevin Shakespeare, the Director of the Institute's Academy. Kevin, you're generously yielding the mic to Richard for much of today's webinar, but great to have you with us as always. Just to get a sense though, why is this such an important topic for listeners today?
Yeah, no, thank you, Will, and good afternoon, everybody. It's an essential topic, and what we really want everyone to appreciate, which I'm sure a lot of you do, is you don't just need to be a multinational business to have issues around and requirements around compliance and export controls. So it impacts an enormous amount of businesses, including technology companies as well as small businesses. So there's a really wide context that we have to consider the importance of this topic. Compliance is really important, and one of my favorite sayings now is compliance leads to competitive advantage. So very, very important subject today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. I like the line. I'm sure we'll hear it on a few more of our future webinars too. But you can read more about our excellent speakers on the slide here, and we'll be sharing the slide pack with you all afterwards, so you'll have a chance to read a bit more then. But if we move to the next slide, I believe we have a poll. And the first poll is just to find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So we were just interested to see how big is your organization, and the options there range from 1 to 50 up to 10,000 plus. So I'll give you a few seconds to answer that poll. And while you are doing that, you can contact me with any comments or questions using the question panel on the control window to the right-hand side of your screen. We hope to get to a number of your questions towards the end of the webinar, though please bear in mind we have received a fair few questions already in advance. So we can't guarantee we'll get to all of your queries, but we'll try our best. If you do feel as though your question has not been answered, please do review our technical helpline or training and consultancy offerings, which we'll be talking about throughout the webinar. Secondly, as already mentioned, you will receive access to today's slide pack, as well as a recording of the webinar in a follow-up email we will be sending over the next day or so. So please do try to listen in as carefully as you can to today's presentation. Right here, quite a lot of you have answered the poll already, so I'm going to close it and share the results. Pretty even spread. So as Kevin was saying, obviously compliance programs are important for all sizes of businesses, and that's reflected by the audience we have today. About half of you, I'd say, were smaller businesses, and half of you were larger or medium-sized businesses. So it's a real spread, even spread there. So thank you everyone for answering that poll. And at this point, it's my delight on the next slide to welcome back Roger Arfi, the Chair of the Institute's Export Control Profession, who will be saying a few words about how the profession can support export control professionals and today's topic. So over to you, Roger.
Well, thank you very much, Will. It's really good to be with you all today. Thank you very much for setting this up, Will, and thank you everyone for joining. I think this is a very interesting and exciting topic. I was thinking that because your panelists are so enthusiastic about this topic, we may well reiterate things that each other have said, because it's such a lively topic in our minds. But just a few words about the export control profession. As I've said before, and many of you know now, We are the only professional body in the UK specially set up by export control specialists for trade control personnel. It's a very exciting little organisation, a very important part of the Institute of Export and International Trade. We were set up to promote professional development and professional recognition of trade control staff. To support the professional development, we provide and support training network and development opportunities. And I think today's webinar introduces a very important development opportunity, both for individuals and for companies. We're going to be concentrating on the benefits to companies of having an internal compliance program. But of course, if you're an export control, trade control professional, and you are helping your organization set up an ICP or to improve your ICP, then it's a great development opportunity for you as well as an individual. Again, we provide resources to enable increased compliance, and I think today, again, is the ICP consultancy program we're talking about today is a great tool for that. In terms of professional recognition, we have post-nominal letters, which you can see there, member of the Institute of the export control profession or associate member for people with less experience. So if you're interested in learning more about us and joining, then do visit the exportcontrolprofession.co.uk page on the Institute of Export Control. So that's the introduction to the ECP. Too many acronyms here. The ECP. Now I'd like to just talk briefly about the ICP. The ICP, many organisations want to improve their compliance or to evaluate how good their compliance is. And a really good way is to develop and maintain an internal compliance program, an ICP, or if you've got one already, to review it to make sure it's still fit for purpose. ICPs are recommended by pretty well every government that has its own export control program. And there are lots and lots of guidance on how to develop and run an ICP. And what we've done with this program is to evaluate and digest all of that lot and turn it into something that we can help you with the development of in your organization. It's actually a requirement in some places. For example, if you're dealing with if you're in the EU and you're dealing with EU dual use goods and technology, then it's a requirement that you have and develop an ICP. So there's lots of advantages, and it also helps the export control organisation, yourselves, to understand what your organisation does and how each part of the organisation is contributing to your compliance and what areas need attention and which areas are doing well. So it gives you a measure as well. So lots of opportunities. One final thing before I pass back to Will, it's very useful to bear in mind that an ICP can be sized and tailored to the size of your organisation. If you're a small organisation, then your ICP can be relatively simple, whereas if you're a big complicated organisation, then your ICP will be appropriately large and complicated to reflect it. So I'm very much looking forward to Richard's presentation in a little while and to hear what sort of questions you've got about our programme. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Roger. And yeah, as noted, you can ask questions throughout the webinar, so please make sure to do so. But on the next slide, we have a question for you, and we're going to ask you, it's a pretty obvious one to ask on today's topic. Does your business already have an internal compliance program in place? The options there being yes, no, not sure. Just while people are answering that poll, Roger, I mean, you say an ICP can be tailored to any size of business. Apart from kind of the size of a business, what sorts of things may contribute towards a greater complexity within a company?
Right. one of the things that I was thinking about, Will, was how, if you haven't got one, if you haven't got an ICP, where on earth do you start? And I was asked this a few times, and what I've suggested to people is to actually do a sort of risk heat map of your organisation. Look at the way your organisation is organised. So you might be organised by product lines, or you might be organised by geography. Look at the way your organisation is organised in itself, how it thinks about itself. And then I would look across that organisation at functions. So the sort of functions I'm thinking of might be engineering, or marketing and sales, or shipping, or procurement. So look at the different functions within your organisation, and then you'll have a sort of little grid. And then you can look at each of those areas and say, okay, what are the export control risks here? Is this a really risky area that needs some attention? Or is this an area where there's no risk of export control, or very small risk of export control non-compliance? And that will give you, if you like, a starting picture of what your organisation, what your ICP might be structured like. So that's the sort of thing that I would say, to break your complexity down into bite-sized chunks.
That's always a good tip, I think, whatever the topic, but particularly when it comes to compliance issues. So thanks, Roger. That's really helpful. Good answer as well. Just to share the results. So 58% of you do already have an ICP in place, about a quarter of you don't, and just under a fifth of you are not quite sure. Is that about what you'd expect, Roger? Is that does that tally with your understanding of the market?
It probably matches with my understanding of the market. I have to say that I was expecting more no's and fewer yeses to that, because you know, I would. But I suppose what it tells us is that people who've got an ICP are interested, perhaps, in how to review it and improve it. So I think that's a very interesting bit of information for you, Richard, when you're doing your presentation. So thank you.
Absolutely, and yeah, Richard's presentation will be going into obviously the main things you need in an ICP, and obviously to that end, it should support people who are here to enhance or maintain their ICPs. So I'm going to, at that very convenient juncture, hide the poll response, and on the next slide, it's my delight to welcome aboard Richard. Hi, Richard. How are you? You doing well?
Yes, I'm very well. Thank you very much, Will. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for that, Roger.
Great. Well, without any further ado, wishing you a good presentation. So over to you, Richard.
Well, thank you very much, Will. So let's have a look at what an ICP effectively is. An ICP is not a single process or procedure. A compliance program is, in fact, an organization's internal systems and procedures for helping to ensure that the organization and those working there comply with legal requirements and internal policies and procedures. Such procedures are things like the commitment to compliance, identifying responsible personnel, information and training, company compliance and procedures, awareness of suspicious inquiries and orders, record keeping, internal audits, and integration with quality management practices. Next slide, please. So let's have a look at the elements we'll be discussing today. So at the top, there's top-level management and their roles. Then there'll be organizational structures, training and awareness requirements, transaction screening, reporting, record keeping and documentation, security, and of course the fines and the non-compliance side. So without ado, let's move on to the next slide, please. So effective ICPs reflect a top-down process whereby the company's top-level management gives significance, legitimacy, organizational, human, and technical resources for their corporate compliance commitments and compliance culture. Top-level management commitments aims to build compliance leadership. Typically, this is led by example, and a corporate compliance culture for military and dual-use trade controls. This element is materialized in the form of a written statement and support from top-level management on internal compliance procedures that promote the company's awareness of and compliance with the UK laws and regulations relating to military and dual-use trade controls. The commitment indicates clear, strong, and continuous engagement and support from top-level management. It results in sufficient organizational, human, and technical resources for the company's commitment to compliance. The management communicates clearly and regularly to employees about the corporate commitment in order to promote a culture of compliance. Now, sufficient organizational, human, and technical resources are essential for effectively developing and implementing compliance procedures. Without a clear organizational structure and well-defined responsibilities, an ICP risks suffering from lack of oversight and undefined roles. Having a strong structure helps organizations work out problems when they arise and prevent unauthorized transactions from occurring. Now, the company is expected to have an internal organization structure that is set down in writing. So, for instance, this could be an organizational chart, and that allows for conducting internal compliance controls. It identifies and appoints the person or persons with the overall responsibility to ensure that the corporate compliance commitments. It is recommended that this should be a member of top-level management. All compliance-related functions, duties, and responsibilities are defined, assigned, and connected to each other in an order that reassures the management that the company conducts and meets compliance requirements. Where necessary, duties, not the overall responsibility, related to export control may be delegated. The company adequately staffs all areas of the business that are related to military dual-use foreign trade with employees who demonstrably have the required skills. At least one person in the company is, not necessarily exclusively, entrusted with the military dual-use trade control. Military dual-use trade control staff should be protected as much as possible from conflicts of interest. They are entitled to directly report to the person or persons with the overall responsibility for trade control and should additionally have the power to stop transactions. Trade control staff should and must have access to relevant legislative text, including the latest lists of controlled goods and lists concerning embargoed or sanctioned destinations and entities. The compliance manual that describes the operational and organizational processes relevant for trade control is drawn up and distributed to the trade control staff. The company should consider the need for IT support for internal compliance procedures on its business volume. Next slide, please. Now, training and awareness raising on military dual-use trade controls is essential for staff to duly perform their tasks and take compliance duties seriously. This is to provide compulsory periodic training for all trade control staff to ensure that they possess the knowledge to be compliant with the regulations and the company's ICP. That then ensures via training that that all concerned employees are aware of all relevant trade control laws, regulations, policies, control lists, and all amendments to them as soon as they're made public by the competent authority. If possible, consider customized trainings. Now, the company should also ensure via training that the trade control staff are aware of all relevant export control regulations, as well as the company's ICP and all amendments to them. Examples of that can be through training material, external seminars, subscription of information sessions offered by competent authorities, and maybe in-house training events, etc. Furthermore, the company carries out awareness raising for the employees at all relevant levels. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of operational implementation, transaction screening is the most critical element of an ICP. This element contains the company's internal measures to ensure that no transaction is made without the required license or against any relevant trade restrictions or prohibition. The transaction screening procedure collects, analyzes relevant information concerning item classification, a transaction risk assessment, license determination and application, and post-licensing. The transaction screening measures also allow the company to develop and maintain a certain standard of care of handling when it comes to suspicious inquiries or orders. Now, denied party screening is a useful tool as part of the screening process. Around the world, countries impose sanctions and embargoes to ensure that they do not deal with countries or companies or individuals considered a risk. All persons and companies are legally obliged to adhere to the relevant sanctions and embargoes. Although denied party screening is not legally required, it is one of the only ways you can ensure you are adhering to the laws. Using a system to do this screening is also considered best practice. Now, the ECJU will have an expectation a company will establish a process to evaluate and determine whether or not a transaction involving military dual-use goods or software or its technology is subject to UK export trade controls. In case of recurring transactions, the process takes into account the transaction screening needs to be performed periodically. This core element is divided into various elements, and these are things like item classification, including software and its technology, transaction risk assessment, in which things like checks on trade-related embargoes, sanctioned and sensitive destinations and entities. You have stated end use and involved party screening, diversion risk screening, and catch-all controls for non-listed dual-use items. Another element is license determination and application, including those brokering and transfer and transit activities, and post-licensing, including shipment control and compliance with the conditions of the authorization. Now, companies might also want to consider using a red flag internal system. This would be triggered if the end user or the end use doesn't meet a set criteria. There are various criteria that we'll go through some of the most obvious ones. And these are things like the customer is new to your company, and your knowledge about him or her is incomplete or inconsistent, or it's difficult to find information about the customer. The stated end user is a trading company, a distributor, or based in a free trade zone. Maybe the end user is tied to the military or as a defense industry or a government research body, and yet they've stated the end use is civilian. The customer seems not to be familiar with the product and its performance characteristics. This is an obvious, there's an obvious sign there's a lack of technical knowledge there. The contact information in inquiries, so that covers things like your phone numbers, emails, and addresses, is located in other countries other than the stated company, or is changed over that time. The company has a foreign company name, for example, in a language that is unexpected for the country where headquarters are located. Or the company website lacks content in comparison to what is normally found on the legitimate company website. Another flag is the customer is reluctant to offer information about the end use of the items, provide clear answers to commercial or technical questions which are routine in normal negotiations, or to provide an end user statement. Maybe an unconvincing explanation is given as to why the items are required, given the customer's normal business or the technical sophistication of the items. There are other red flags that can be considered as well. So within the shipping side of it, you might have unusual shipping or packaging or labeling arrangements might be requested. Maybe the Incoterms might be unusual for the shipment, or the sealing of containers and trucks and the confirmation of receipts by the consignee or the end user are refused. There might be red flags within the finance on the contract side of it. So there might be unusually favorable payment terms, such as paying an unreasonably high price, full payment in advance, or want to do full cash payment immediately. The payment is made by other parties than the customer is stated, or might be stated. Intermediaries might follow another route than the products. Routine installation, training, or maintenance services might be declined. The installation site is in an area under strict security control, or is in an area to which access is severely restricted, or is unusual in view of the type of equipment being installed. There are unusual requirements for excessive confidentiality about final destination or the customer or specification of the items. In case of doubt or suspicion during the transaction screening process, in particular about the results of the stated end use and involved parties or diversion risk screening, it's always recommended you consult with ECJU or HMRC. Sharing information and suspicious inquiries with those bodies is highly recommended and is good business practice. In case of doubt, please consult those bodies and trust your instincts. You know best what is suspicious within your business arena. Next slide, please. Now, an ICP is not a static set of measures and therefore must be reviewed, tested and revised if proven necessary for safeguarding compliance. Performance reviews and audits verify whether the ICP is implemented to operational satisfaction and is consistent with UK export control requirements. A well-functioning ICP has clear reporting procedures about the notification and escalation actions of employees when a suspected or known incident of non-compliance has occurred. A part of sound compliance culture, employees must feel confident and reassured when they raise questions or report concerns about compliance in good faith. Performance reviews, audits, and reporting procedures are designed to detect inconsistencies, to clarify and revise routines if they result in non-compliance. The company should develop performance review procedures to verify the day-to-day compliance work within the company and to check whether the export control operations are implemented appropriately according to the ICP. It is executed internally if it enables for early detection of non-compliance and follow-up measures for damage control, and it reduces risk for the company. The company has procedures in place for audits, being systematic, targeted, and documented inspections to confirm that the ICP is correctly implemented. Audits can be done internally or by an independent auditor. If resources allow, it is good business practice to periodically deploy an outside auditor. External audits can provide an unbiased third-party evaluation and validation of an organization's overall export compliance program and practices. Reporting is the set of procedures for military dual-use trade control staff and other relevant employees regarding notification and escalation measures to take in the event of suspected or known instance of military dual-use trade non-compliance. Corrective actions are a set of remedial actions to guarantee the proper implementation of the ICP and the elimination of identified vulnerabilities in the compliance procedures. Next slide, please. Now, proportionate and accurate and traceable record keeping of trade control related activities is essential for your company compliance efforts. A comprehensive record keeping system will help your company with conducting performance reviews and audits, complying with national documentation retention requirements, and it will facilitate cooperation with competent authorities in the case of trade control inquiries. Record keeping is the set of procedures and guidelines for legal document storage, record management and traceability of military dual-use trade control related activities. Some documents are required to be maintained by law, others are not. Some documents, for example, an internal document describing the technical decision to classify an item, may be in your company's best interest to maintain. If all required documents are captured and correctly filed, this allows for a more efficient search and retrieval during the day-to-day trade control activities and also during the periodic audits. Now, companies might want to consider using a technology transfer log. This log should include elements, things like type of project, and within that, the names of the projects and naming of ongoing company engagements, the start and finish dates of the project, departments and named persons who will be involved in the transferring of any data, and the types of data. So is that on email, presentations, phone calls, drawings, blueprints, etc., as well as the ECCN number of the goods involved. Now, also companies might want to consider using a unique consignment reference number or a UCR number. This UCR number should be a one-off number that is unique to that consignment worldwide. This system is also recommended by the WCO, the World Customs Organization. To maximize and to use it effectively, it should be used as the primary reference number for all documentation associated with the export. This includes documentation such as the commercially created documents, that's the commercial invoice and packing lists, the export and import declarations, so the C88 and the E2, maybe the sales contract and purchase order, and all associated documentation. Financial invoices and bank records, export and import licensing, including the end user declaration. And all internal and external communication should have a reference to this UCR, maybe in the subject matter title, for example. Now, implementing a UCR will give many advantages, not only to the seller, but also to the buyer, as well as third-party companies involved in that supply chain, Some of the advantages are having a complete audit of the goods ready-made, which then makes the actual auditing easier and quicker. Easy and quick referencing, so not only to the internal filing, but in conversations and any communications. The UCR also indicates to HMRC that you are taking additional control and responsibility for your supply chain. Next slide, please. Now, trade controls of sensitive items, including software and technology, occur for reasons of international security and foreign policy objectives. Therefore, having appropriate security measures contributes to containing risks concerning unauthorized removal of controlled dual-use items. Because of its very nature, ensuring compliance with dual-use trade regulations for controlled software or technology in electronic form can be particularly challenging. Physical and information security refer to the set of internal procedures that are designed to ensure that the prevention of unauthorized removal of dual-use items by employees, contractors, suppliers, or visitors. These procedures cultivate a security culture within the company, ensuring that the military dual-use items, including software and technology, do not get lost or easily stolen or exported without a valid license. Next slide, please. Now, non-compliance, or better yet, operating in a compliant manner, should be at the foremost thought for any company operating an ICP. Depending on the severity and frequency of the non-compliance, HMRC is taking a more lenient viewpoint and leaning initially towards education, training, and self-auditing, under strict guidance, of course, from HMRC. Having said that, where a company has a repeated non-compliance record or the severity of the non-compliance is severe enough, then HMRC will take more appropriate actions. So that's my presentation for today. I'll hand you back to Will. I hope it's of some use to you.
Thank you, Richard. That's a very thorough presentation, bang on time as well, which is always appreciated. But yeah, excellent, really good stuff. So thank you for covering all of that today. I'm just going to ask on the next slide, our next poll. So this is asking, is your internal compliance program up to date? So it'll be interesting to see how a number of people responding to this tallies with the response to the earlier poll. Just while people are answering that one, Richard, thank you for the presentation again, really good stuff. And we've had obviously a few questions come through. One's in from George, and it's one Roger touched on earlier, but I think it's worth repeating. And he's asking, what is small businesses, and his business in particular is an online business, what do they need to consider when thinking through an internal compliance program as opposed to, say, a larger one?
So, as Roger said, and perfectly right, our ICP is scalable. If you're a small, young business, it's very easy to implement because your processes and procedures are relatively small scale. So, if you're an online business, then it's having that engagement with the end user and discussing the end use of the item. And then it's the larger your business gets, as Roger rightly said, the more issues and the more difficult it gets to manage and implement and manage. So from a small business perspective, it's relatively straightforward. I think we are happily engaged with George, was it, on this on a one-to-one level, so we can advise him accordingly with what's best practice.
Yes, it was George. So yeah, George, hopefully that's been helpful, but do feel free to get in touch if you'd like any more guidance. Right, I'm going to close that poll, share the results. So this is really interesting. So it's different to the first poll. 37% of you do think your compliance program needs to be updated. So think it is up to date even. 30% no, 33% not sure. So certainly a lot more people unsure about whether it needs to be whether it's up to date compared to whether they have one or not. Which implies that a few people who said yes in the first poll view their program to not be necessarily fully up to date as of today. So interesting poll response there. And actually, I think our next speaker is going to be Kevin. Kevin, I wonder if there's anything, any comments you have on that poll. Is that a surprise to you?
Yeah, first of all, thank you everybody for answering that. Yeah, it's interesting, excuse me, as Will said, in comparison with the first poll. It's also, I think, important that businesses, if they have an ICP program, don't just assume everything's up to date, because the way trade works changes, supply chains change as well, and certainly COVID's had an impact in that regard. And also some of the issues around freight movements means that some vessels are not calling at certain ports. So please bear in mind that regard, that knowing the end-to-end supply chain could mean that there is a need to review your internal compliance program if the actors in the supply chain have also changed.
Thanks, Kevin. A lot more eloquently put than my garbling just there. So yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you everyone for the response to the poll. And on the next slide, we're going to hand over to Kevin to talk about some of the support that the IOE provides in this area.
Yeah, it's fair to say, I think the Institute, it's probably only been in the last year or so that we've really provided more around the export controls piece, and probably the last 2 years. And I think that's in recognition of the importance of of this topic touching so many companies, and many companies maybe not realizing that the impacts touch their business. So we provide courses around in the introduction to export licensing controls, which can be very important, and then a deeper understanding of US, clearly, which is really important in what we're saying, and UK export controls. And we also have a self-guided learning package in partnership with content enablers as well. So that's the training. But if we have the next tab, please, on the consultancy. What we've tried to introduce more now is very much linked to topic today, is an ICP internal compliance program consultancy. Now, we called it export controls because we felt on our website, if it had internal compliance programs, that some businesses might not recognize what that was meant to be, and hence wouldn't find out further information. But it is effectively an export controls internal compliance program. And the actual rate charge, bearing in mind the importance of this topic and the importance of trade compliance, is clearly relatively well discounted from start. And the Institute have lots of experience and resource in this very, very important area. And clearly for business members, there's more of a significant reduction in what you pay. But and bearing in mind that we are effectively doing this with the importance of this topic and the day rate, to recognise the importance for businesses to be compliant. Yes, it is important in terms of avoiding penalties and fines. Nobody wants that, but it's equally important to try and, as I said, gain that competitive advantage. So during the consultancy day, we will look at things like written procedures, we'll look at your record keeping, we'll look at your trade documents, and we'll also look at the end-to-end supply chain, which is really important, including end use and end users as well. As well as looking at sanctions, embargoes and red flags. And we must bear in mind that some of the sanctions are not just some of the obvious sanctions put in place by the United Nations. There are sanctions, for example, put in place by the United States, which compels all our banks to comply with those sanctions. So we may have a transaction going somewhere which we don't think is subject to sanctions, but suddenly we find out that the United States has intervened in it because it's a US sanctions country. So sanctions, embargoes change. We only need to think about what's going on in the world today and the importance. So understanding sanctions, the end-to-end supply chain, is really, really important. If we have the next slide, please. So if you require further information, please contact us. I've obviously mentioned around the training and the internal compliance program that we support. You can also contact us on membership services at export.org.uk, and that goes with any element of export controls. Obviously, any element of trade, customs, logistics, and supply chain as a whole. But again, whatever type of company you are, if you're a technology company, if you're just providing software as a service, or you're providing dual goods that could be dual use, this is really, really important for your business, because compliance is absolutely essential. Visibility, transparency in the supply chain, and increasingly sustainability is really, really important to the way that all businesses operate. So in that, I'm going to pass back to William. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. And yeah, we'll be sending an email to everyone afterwards of the links to the slides and recording, and also how people can find out, well, VE's email, contact and phone number as well. If we move to the next slide, we're going to do one last poll. This is just trying to gauge your interest in training or consultancy relating to internal compliance programs. This is probably one I won't share the results to. It's more for just us to get a sense of where everyone's at internally. But yeah, in advance, thank you for answering. So we do have 10 to 15 minutes now for questions. So please feel free to ask questions using the control window to the right-hand side of your screen. And please note that if you could keep the questions relatively succinct, that would make my life a lot easier. So try to, yeah, one line or one sentence questions are ideal. Whole paragraphs, I do have to digest them a little bit. So yeah, if you make my life easier, then I'll be very appreciative of that. Anyway, first question is I'll put it to Richard, and we'll invite Roger to comment as well. But it's from Caroline, whose company is implementing and maintaining internal compliance program as part of a requirement of DU Regulation 2021-821. What recommendations can you make for enhancing our program through internal collaboration while ensuring continuous improvement? Richard.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Will, and the question. I would have to take that on board and digest it and come back to that lady with a proper detailed answer, I think. Roger, did you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, certainly. With all these things, I suppose to a certain extent, it's a matter of taking a step back and going back to first principles, to a certain extent to first principles, and that is to evaluate what your ICP looks like in relationship, on the one hand, to your current organisation and its trade. So does it reflect your organisation in the first place? Has your organisation grown or changed shape? And on the other hand, has your product range changed? I mean, have you moved into new areas? Has your supply chain changed? Are you, let's take for an example, you were using items that you were fairly confident were dual use items. Have you inadvertently, and it can be done, do believe me, have you inadvertently started dealing with some items that are actually regarded as military under some regimes, in which case you need to sort of make sure that your systems and processes cover those new products. And then on the other side, the regulations, as we've already seen, the regulations are changing quite frequently. So have the regulations changed since you created your ICP in the first place? If the ICP was produced some while ago, of course, US export control reform might have moved some of your items from the ITAR list to the EAR list. And now, of course, recently we've gone through what we all call Brexit, end of transition. And so therefore, the fact that the UK is no longer within the EU export control regime, maybe all the license structures need to be revised. So it's a matter of reviewing the whole thing in the light of constantly changing situations. And as we've said, if this is something you'd like an independent organisation to just have a look at, then effectively you could use this consultancy process that we've been talking about almost as a cross between an ICP development and an external audit to review what you've got and see whether it reflects the current reality. So those are just some thoughts. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Roger. I think we could just move next slide, it'll become more self-evident in the Q&A. But we're getting some really good questions in, touching on what you just said, actually. A few questions in around US export controls. We had Justine asking if we'd be able to cover ITAR compliance. And Jill was asking about whether we'll be doing any sessions on things like ITAR and EAR. So, I mean, obviously it's a huge topic. It's probably its own webinar, but I'll invite Roger first and then possibly Richard to comment on just some of the US compliance requirements the companies need to be aware of. Yeah, sure. Well, certainly, as you've already seen what Kevin was saying earlier about the training courses, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, but the IOE provides some introduction to US export controls, which are always pretty useful if that's the stage of your development you're at. We've got this arrangement with content enablers, and they provide a comprehensive set of training in US export controls, both ITAR and EAR. And by all means, do look at those. The nice thing about those, or a number of nice things about those actually, one is that they're online, which means that they're very easily accessible. The other thing is that the way that the content enablers courses are structured, they're very modular. So the information is organized into 3 or 4 or 5 minute chunks. And they're very densely packed with information. So you can watch one and then think about it and then watch it again to pick up the nuances. So once you've got access to it, you've got full availability of those courses. So I would recommend strongly that you look at those. There's a range of courses dealing with different users, but it's quite comprehensive. So that's in terms of the training. In terms of the ICP program, of course, any ICP of an organisation that deals with US export controlled materials, goods that are coming into the UK from the US, for example, or technology that's being shared with the US. Your ICP needs to cover that, and that would be incorporated in the consultancy which we're offering today. Richard, is anything from your experience to add just in terms of US compliance?
Okay, so we offer obviously training. We've got some in-house experts to do with ITAR, and we can go through. I think I would recommend a consultancy at this point with these people, and we can then engage with them on a more bespoke level with our consultants, all to do with ITAR, and the separation between ITAR and EAR. And then we can get down to the fundamentals of the business and give them the best practice and point them in the right direction. So I look forward to hearing from them very soon, actually, because it's something that's becoming more and more, especially if and when, I think when would be a better word, when we have agreement with a free trade agreement with the Americans. That then will open a door, maybe Pandora's box, who knows, we'll wait and see on that front. But that is in the offing, and I think companies need to be more aware of it in the very near future as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, we don't know when exactly that will be. It may not be in the next 3-4 years, but it might be in the next 10 years, and that's still going to have an impact. Thank you for those answers. A question has come in from David, as important clarification, I suppose. He's asked, is an ICP only required for military and dual-use goods? Richard?
No, absolutely not necessary at all. The main, probably a large portion of the industry is all around military and dual use. probably more around dual use because it's a lot more difficult topic to specify, because we've had numerous UK traders who have been in some very obscure industries, and their products that they deal with as part of their bread and butter actually comes under dual use, and they had absolutely no idea about it. And we just went in for something, a different service, so maybe an ITS or a health check with them, and it came to light that actually their product did actually meet dual use requirements because of their activities. So this is an ICP is not necessarily for just about dual use. Obviously it can be applied to all businesses because it's all about standards and maintaining and meeting those standards. It's just happened to be a large portion of the industry is about export licensing and controlling, but also all exporters around in the UK have a responsibility to know who they're selling the product to and where it's going to and the end use of the product, irrespective if it needs an export license or not. So that is a major application that HMRC do kind of expect. So an ICP can apply to all companies, no matter what. Just today's focus was, well, the military dual use terminology came up a lot, but if you take that out of the equation, and it's all about trade controls, which applies to all companies in the UK. Do you have anything to add, Roger, to that one?
I was just thinking exactly what you said, but one of the areas that you mentioned, Richard, as you were going through, was also sanctions as well, which is an important thing for people to think about. And once again, might be something that some organisations might not be as aware of as they could be. So, you know, just this sort of thing ferrets those things out. As you say, we were approached by a small company through the helpline. They've got a specific question, and in asking for more information to help them help us to understand the question, it turned out that they were dealing with dual use items and they needed more licenses. And in fact, we had to sort of help them create what was effectively a mini ICP, or the beginnings of an ICP, so they could understand what their organisation was dealing with and how to deal with it compliantly.
Yeah.
I wonder if this question follows, and forgive me if I don't quite interpret this correctly, but it's a question from Sylvia, who's asked, do you do a dual use analysis on goods when requested?
Define dual use analysis.
I think the answer to that is that we're happy we're happy to do the sort of analysis, well, any sort of analysis of that you have in mind. I just want to emphasize that sometimes that small question can turn into a very large answer, and a large answer, if you're inviting a consultant to come and help you with doing that, it can be, you know, if you've got thousands and thousands of pieces you're talking about, or items, plus the associated technology, it can become quite a large job. But I'm sure the Institute would be interested in helping find somebody who could help you do that.
Interestingly, that question came up because a few months ago we did have another UK trader who approached us on a very, very similar. He wanting help with classification of his of goods and making sure that he was going through the UK strategic control list correctly. So he was in line with HMRC because he had had a few discussions, should we say, with HMRC. So he wanted our help. So that was actually, there is actually a proposal in place where we will put this service in place. And as Roger rightly says, and agree, that the consultancy is something I think we can definitely help somebody with here. As long as it's not thousands of items, that we'll be there for many months going through this. But you know, I think that's something we could definitely look into on a more bespoke level for the company.
A thin line between a consultancy and a secondment, it seems as though it's being touched out there. We've got time for one last question. I'm sorry we're not being able to get to everyone's questions. I mean, Hilda, James, please do get in touch with us afterwards. We'll try to get to those questions. They're good ones. But one last one from Ben, which might actually be one for Kevin, because it's around kind of relationships with your customs brokers. So Ben says he has an ICP in place. He's being pressed by the team to get brokers to clear goods with the HS code specified on the commercial invoice. He says this doesn't always happen, as the HS for that good is interpreted differently in that country. Typically, the first 6 digits of the classification are always declared matching the CI. What is the best practice here? Don't know if you picked that up. It's a bit of a chunky one, but yeah.
No, it's a really good question. So yeah, absolutely. The first 6 digits for commodity code will be the same globally, based on harmonized system codes. So that's absolutely correct. Now, clearly on your commercial invoice, so first of all, obviously the responsibility for declarations will be down to the Incoterms that are agreed. Let's just say you as the exporter are responsible for the export declaration. So you're using an Incoterm, any other Incoterm with the exception of Ex Works. You are responsible for the declaration. So you are responsible there for the accuracy of all information. And the information should be on the commercial invoice as well. So certainly your customs broker, if they're making the declaration on your behalf, ultimately you're liable for that declaration, but that they would need to input the commodity code in, and that commodity code would either be drawn from a commercial invoice, and it should be on the commercial invoice, or if they ask you to provide some sort of template to populate the application to them. But the commodity code should always be on the commercial invoice, and in fact your broker probably should be ensuring that it's on there as well.
Thanks, Kevin. I hope that's been helpful, Ben. And as you'll see on the last slide, we've sadly run out of time. So thank you everyone for the questions. There's some really good ones there and a couple we didn't get to, so we'll try to look at those offline. But thank you once again to Richard, Kevin and Roger for your time today. A fantastic presentation, Richard, and Kevin and Roger, thank you for the inputs as well and the answers too. We do have quite a few more webinars still to come before the end of the year. You can find details of all of these at export.org.uk/webinars. For now, though, thank you for tuning in. We hope to see you on the next one. But for now, goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.
Cheerio.
Thank you.
Goodbye.